In early November, our youth put on a service about some of our most influential African-American civil rights leaders. How many of you were here for that? It was an amazing service, right? Like, it was one of the best. I think it will go down as one of the highlights of the year. I am sorry that there weren't more people there because you missed an amazing service. The youth staged themselves all across the front of the sanctuary, and they brought to life some of the voices of the civil rights era, creating a poignant, disturbing, and yet hopeful service. Really, they did the best service to bring the voice of Dr. King and his contemporaries to life. So what I wanted to do was bring the issue of what Dr. King was fighting for into the modern era. Dr. King knew that slavery wasn't over, it was just transformed. It was transformed in his time into denying of people of color having the right to vote. Through insipid practices, politicians and whites and powers applied tactic after tactic to keep blacks from exercising their constitutional right to vote. We can still argue that the access to vote for our siblings of color is compromised through a myriad of inequities. But this morning, I want us to push it even a little bit further. Because, my dear ones, our nation's legacy of slavery is still here with us. As it was before the 15th Amendment was passed in 1870, as it was through the Jim Crow era, it is still here. But now we call it prison. I want you to brace yourselves, get yourself grounded, because I'm going to give you a bunch of statistics. In 1980, the number of people incarcerated in America was 500,000, 500,000 people. Now there are 2.3 million people. The number has quintupled in 40 years. Today, the United States makes up about 5% of the world's population, but it has 21% of the world's prisoners. We are by far the most prisoning country in the world. That's difficult enough, but when we look at the racial disparities in incarceration, it gets much worse. Black people represent 12% of our population, but they represent 34% of the total correctional population. African Americans are incarcerated at more than 5 times the rate of white people. Nationwide, African American children represent 32% of children who are arrested, but 42% of children who are detained, and 52% of children whose cases are sent to adult court. And if African Americans and Hispanics were incarcerated at the same rates as whites, then the prison and jail populations would decline immediately by almost 40%. Okay, I need you to breathe. Breathe. We will get through this sermon together, I promise. But please don't look away. Do not forget these numbers. Don't think that just because you can't see it every day that it doesn't exist. And I'm so glad that we have abolished private prisons as our Share the Plate partner today, because not only do we have slavery in a different form, people are profiting off of it in similar ways that plantation owners profited off the backs of their slaves for over 2 centuries of our country's history. When prisons become for profit, which is a multi-billion-dollar industry, we have owners and shareholders who benefit when more people are in prison. The systems are linked. We have a history of being complacent and not looking at our different versions of slavery. That's why I called this sermon A Comfortable Racism. It's a provocative title meant to poke you a little bit because too many of us can just explain this new form of slavery away. Well, they're criminals. They did something to deserve this. If they had just followed the law and everything that continues beyond that. And we lock people up, and many of us in our comfortable lives don't see into that world and to a regular basis unless we are related to people in the system. We put them all into concentrated places and we tuck them away. And then when they have done their time and paid their debt to society, whatever that means, we take away their rights. A third of Black men have felony records and are relegated to a permanent second-class status. Tens of millions of people in the United States have been stripped of their basic civil and human rights, including the right to vote, the right to serve on juries, the right to be free of legal discrimination in employment, housing, education, and basic public benefits. When they are in jail, their bodies are physically separated. When they are released, their voices are separated. But they still exist. And if we are a people who value the worth and dignity of all people, if we are a people who fight for justice and equity in our human relations, if we are a people who believe that the democratic process should apply to all people, and these are our 7 principles of Unitarian Universalism, then we can't turn away. And this situation has not received enough political resistance because people of all colors have been willing to tolerate the disposal of millions of individuals once they have been labeled criminals. We need to expand our sphere of worth and dignity so that it includes everyone, even those branded as criminals, so that they are not seen or treated as disposable. Are you still breathing? Breathe with me. We can't be comfortable with this. We can't celebrate Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., but then not look at how the struggle that he fought so hard, all of that he tried to overcome, has just morphed into another form of struggle. Dr. King himself wrote some of his most famous words when he was locked up in a Birmingham jail. He said, "Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly." Michelle Alexander, the author of the book of the reading that Sam read, she wrote her book. It's an awesome book if you haven't read it, The New Jim Crow. She wrote it 10 years ago, before Barack Obama was elected president. She wrote an article that came out in the New York Times just this Friday. And she wrote that at the time that she wrote the book, that our nation remained in deep denial that a new caste system even existed, and most of us, even those who cared deeply about racial justice, did not seem to understand that powerful racial dynamics and political forces were at play that made much of our racial progress illusionary. We had not faced our racial history and could not tell the truth about our racial present, yet growing numbers of Americans wanted to elect a Black president and leap into a colorblind future. But if the 2016 election taught us anything, it is that we are not colorblind. Alexander says that we now have a president who embraces the rhetoric and the politics of white nationalism. This is a president who openly stokes racial animosity and even racial violence. We are now living in an era of not post-racialism, but of unabashed racialism, a time when many white Americans feel free to speak openly of their nostalgia of an age when their cultural, political, and economic dominance could be taken for granted. No apologies required. Racial bigotry, fear-mongering, and scapegoating are no longer subterranean in our political discourse. The dog whistles have been replaced by bullhorns. So many of us are outraged, but I want us to remember that this is not an aberration. We can sit here in our outrage and say, isn't this terrible? This is awful. But this behavior has been around for the entirety of our history. Those in power have always used this playbook to preserve racial hierarchy or to exploit racial anxieties for political and financial gain. And we've extended the concept of locking people up. We've widened the spheres from locking up criminals to locking up illegals. It's a slightly different jail cell, but it is exactly the same concept. Separating people with darker skin, separating their families, putting them behind bars, and telling the masses that they are terrorists, rapists, or drug dealers. Whether those who were demonized were brown-skinned from Central or South America, or whether they were brown-skinned from Muslim countries, the commonality was the non-white color of their skin. As a society, we are learning, slowly, but we're learning. We are protesting the locking up of immigrants, but we need to be just as furious as the locking up of our black and brown siblings in prison and jails and the stripping of their rights. We need to be just as angry about the absurdly long sentences that take our siblings' lives as we are about police killings that also take our siblings' lives. So I imagine you are saying, what can we do? Some of you are saying, please, Reverend Christine, please tell me what I can do. Well, some of you have figured out from me that sometimes my answer is that what we do is that we be, that we sit with the uncomfortableness of this. But here are a bunch of ideas of what you can do as well. You can stop by the abolished private prisons and drop off more money. Even though this offering has already been taken up, they can use all the help that they can get. I'm assuming you'll accept more if, yes, okay. You can read the new Jim Crow, and I will publish Michelle Alexander's recent article in our Facebook page, and educate yourself about what's going on. Once you see something, once you learn something about, you can't unlearn it. You can go see the movie Just Mercy. Walk, don't walk, run. Run and see Just Mercy about Brian Stevenson and the Equal Justice Initiative. It's in movie theaters right now. You can plan a life-changing trip to Montgomery, Alabama, and see the Legacy Movement Museum, which documents the slavery to Jim Crow to prison pipeline and the lynching memorial there. You can fight for voting rights by joining Stacey Abrams' Fair Fight initiative for free, fair, and secure elections in 2020. And you can fight for the rights for those who have been convicted of crimes, restoring their voting rights, removing those darn felony boxes that they have to check on housing and job applications, and empowering their voices in the political process. If we care about the legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., and I truly believe that we do, then we need to work to continue his legacy. We cannot say, that was then, look at how much we did good for us. We cannot be comfortable with the racism that exists all around us. In 1958, Dr. King said, "True peace is not merely the absence of tension, it is the presence of justice." I wish you tension. I wish you conflict. I want you to be uncomfortable. This is a unique place for me as a minister. Normally, I want to relieve those things, but not today. I wish you discomfort because we cannot live up to our ideals until we look at the problems of race that our country has always struggled with, still struggles with, and fight for lasting solutions. So might it be. Amen.